Hey folks, Tim Newman with Soft Light Studios coming to you once again from Columbus, Ohio. Now, if you've been following along in our Photoshop puzzle template series, you probably suspect that this is going to be video number 3. And indeed it is. In this video, we're going to take what we've learned about building our puzzle templates so far and really kind of turn it on its head. And in doing so, we're going to accomplish 2 really cool things. One is we're going to learn how to really change how we set up this clipping mask and subsequent clipping masks for future use in cool ways. That'll be video number 4. And 2, we're going to learn how to really apply some cool styling to the look of this puzzle. So let's jump right in and take a look at our Photoshop puzzle template video number 3. When we were last together in video 2 of this series on Photoshop puzzle templates, we had just finished working through this puzzle version here where we had created 4 puzzle sections, basically dividing the puzzle up into fourths. In creating each of those sections, you might recall that we made selections of the interior of the puzzle pieces, and then we filled that in with black. Then we used these black quadrants of the puzzle, if you will, to create clipping layers of these 4 images that we brought in here. And then, of course, we put the puzzle frames sitting on top of the document. So basically, we're just using those as see-through layers on top of there to create the puzzle framework around it. Now, in this next video, we're going to kind of turn this on its head a little bit. We're going to take the same approach for creating it, but we're going to end up with a wholly different result, which I think will be pretty cool. And it certainly is going to show off a bunch of additional features in Photoshop. For us to get started, all we need to do is come up here and do File New to create us a new document. That's Command N on the Mac, a Control N on Windows. And I'm going to use this finished picture and some of its characteristics in some video stuff later. So I'm going to come over here and use the film and video presets. I'm going to take a look at all these presets, and I'm going to create an ultra high def TV layout here, which gives us 3840 pixels by 2160 pixels. That's twice 1920 by 1080 in case you're keeping track of the math there. Even though 72 pixels per inch is great for TV-based output, we're going to go with 300 pixels per inch just in case we would choose to print this. And of course, if we were to bring it into Premiere, it'll take care of sampling that and make it fit without any problems. So we get the best of both worlds here by doing that. RGB color mode, no problem. We're going to go with 16-bit color. And then I'm going to go with a transparent background. Now, by default, a lot of these film and video templates that we have over here come in as not color managed, which we don't need for doing video production work. But like I said, I might want to print it, so I'm going to come up here and flip this over to my working RGB space, which is ProPhoto RGB. And I love that feature of this new document dialog box, the fact that you can grab settings from a preset and then come over here and say, okay, I want to modify this, this, and this, and get, like I said, the best of both worlds in the document I'm about to create. So let's go ahead and put that together. Now, we are going to eventually load up 2 documents here. If you look down below in the description for this video, you will see that there is a link to a Google Drive folder available to you, and there are 2 files that you can download from there to use in this tutorial if you'd like to follow along and use them. So I'm going to go ahead and open one of them now. Just come up here and do a file open, and I've already downloaded them. They're sitting here locally, and that's this large puzzle .eps file. Now, a .eps file is encapsulated PostScript. It's a output format that can go directly to a PostScript printer and print without any problem. It's kind of a little bit of a throwback to the print house or service bureau days when a lot of these guys were taking EPS files and printing them as high resolution documents. They can also be editable as individual elements in Adobe Illustrator. And if we load it here it will go ahead and rasterize it for us. It might raster it for us too, but only if we're in Jamaica. No, this will rasterize it for us, and it's basically going to bring it in and set it up as a document with all of the elements in it drawn out. And we're going to go ahead and just take the native sizes here for this, which is huge. We don't care about the color mode. Pixels per inch is a nice resolution. I'm good with that, so we'll click on OK. And Photoshop's going to go ahead and bring this document in. It takes it a second, but you can see right here, largepuzzle.eps, open in that tab. And here it is. That's rasterized for us. So the process of rasterization takes those individual lines that might be editable in something like Illustrator, and it turns them into actual pixel content on the layer. So what you're seeing here is a number of black lines drawn in a transparent layer. So all of that checkerboard grid that you see there is actual transparency around this document, which is going to work really well for us. So now that we have this open, we're just going to come over here to the Layers Control panel, grab this Layer 1 strip, click and drag on it, and we're going to bring it up here to our new Untitled 1 document that we just created. I'm going to hold down that Shift key because I'd like it to be centered, and then I'm going to let go with the mouse first. And of course, we're going to get that depth warning message that we get, but yep, there it is. It brings it in. Wow, those are some big puzzle pieces. No problem. We are going to zoom out, and we are going to activate the Move tool with the V key. That's our Move tool right there. And as long as we have Show Transform controls turned on, we can see our borders of the size of this document, which is way bigger than the art space here. I'm using the shift or the arrow here in the corner and the mouse to drag this down. I'm using the Shift key to unlock the aspect ratio constraint of this move/transform, and I'm adding in the Option key on the Mac, the Alt key on Windows, to allow me to resize it unidirectionally from the center. And I don't even have to get the size correct here. I can just get close. I'm going to let go of the mouse first, modifier keys second, so it doesn't snap back to constraint or snap back to one side. I'm going to do a Command 0 on the Mac, Control 0 on Windows, just to scale this up so I can see it in the window here. Now, this looks a little rough, and you may recall in having looked at this stuff before that anytime you are doing a free transform, the contents don't completely redraw until you've committed that transform. So don't worry about how rough this looks. Now what I'm going to do is just kind of size this up a little bit. And remember, you can see we're resizing from 3 sides at once. I'm going to hold down that Shift key to unlock that. And I'm not going to go all the way to the edge, and I'll tell you why. This is a gotcha that a lot of people run into. So let's just kind of resize this out to here for now. And let's go ahead and hit enter. And it'll go ahead and commit that change. And as soon as it does, it will redraw in there. And I'm going to go ahead and hit the A key to turn off that Move tool and the transparency frame that's on it, grabbing the Direct Selection tool temporarily. Now, one thing I can tell you is it's a little hard to see the outlines of this puzzle because of the transparency that's involved in it. So let's go down here to Layer 1, and we'll just reuse this layer. We're going to double click on it. We're going to call it White Background. And then we're going to grab the Paint Bucket tool with the G key. Make sure you have the bucket tool that looks like this. Currently, our foreground color is black, background color is white. Double check that. Easy enough to hit the D key to bring up the default colors, and the X key to switch foreground and background, and then we'll just fill that in. Those lines look a lot better already. So there we go. There's our puzzle frame. Now, let's talk a little bit about why I didn't resize this out to the edge. And that is because I plan on getting rid of this black frame that's around the outside of this puzzle. I don't want this frame around the outside. And I know if you think back to videos 1 and video 2, you're like, well, that black frame really framed up the puzzle really well. Well, we're not going to frame it this way this time. We're actually going to take these pieces and we're going to lose the puzzle frame black lines that are here. Hard to believe because you're like, well, wait, how are we going to see the puzzle then? But you'll see as we move along here. And we're going to use a layer effect style to give us a three-dimensional kind of embossed look to the puzzle pieces. And if you've ever worked on a puzzle, you know that's exactly how they look. Where the cutting process happens, the edges are kind of rounded just a tiny little bit, and it looks very dimensional. And that's the look we want to go after here today. So what I want to do here, before I size this frame out, I need to get rid of that black edge. Now you might be tempted to just say, well, I'll just grab this layer 2 here. In fact, let's rename that while we're here. Sorry to kind of jump around on here, but we're going to call this puzzle frame so it's clear to us what that layer means later when we're looking at it. You might be tempted to just come in here and say, well, Tim, I'll just grab the move tool, I'll go into free transform mode and drag the black edges right off the edge of the picture. However, if you move this puzzle frame around, even though those black edges are off the edge of the picture, the content is still there. So if you take this and you move this frame around, you're using it in a clipping layer, for example, that might be a hint as to what's coming up in this video and in part 4 of this series. All of a sudden, those lines will come back as you move them back into view in the document itself. So we want to get rid of them. We want to make them go away so that we never have to contend with them again. Real straightforward way to do that, we are going to grab the rectangular marquee tool. That's this guy right here, which I got to with the M key. If you don't get that tool and you get something else, like the elliptical marquee or the single column, single row, any of those, just keep hitting M, or you might have to hit Shift M. Remember preferences, you can turn that use Shift key for tool switch off. I'm going to start right inside of the puzzle frame here, and I'm going to draw myself a rectangular marquee. You'll notice that I have stayed inside the puzzle frame all the way around. I've left that black frame outside that selection. We want to adjust and get as close to that as possible. We don't want to go over it yet, all right? But we want to get there, and we want to make this adjustment really clean so that the edge of this selection is right up against the edge of this frame on all 4 sides, so that when we get rid of it, we don't mess up the size of any of the puzzle pieces on any 4 of the edges here. With this selection active, what I'd like to do now is fine-tune this selection to get it really tucked up closer to that outside black border around this puzzle. And I'm going to point out now what I think is a little bit of a gotcha here in Photoshop, at least to me. What I want to do is what's known as a transform selection, not to be confused with a free transform. So whereas a free transform allows me to transform the contents of the selection, a transform selection allows me to transform the selection itself without modifying the contents. A little bit of a fine line there in terms of the title of each of those steps, but it's an important difference all the same. Now, if you've used free transform before, you know that when you have an active selection, if you do a Command T on a Mac or a Control T on Windows, you get the adjustment frame here, which you can identify by seeing the adjustment handles on it. And once that's active, inside that frame, if you right click, you'll notice you get this pop-up menu. And in this pop-up menu, then you have the ability to pick any of these free transform commands, including the free transform itself. But what's not in this menu is the transform selection. Okay, fair enough. I'll escape out of here. But you notice as soon as I escape out of here, the rectangular marquee tool, which was active, is no longer active. It's deactivated that tool. Okay, so I'm going to hit escape to get out of free transform. My selection is back. That's great. I don't have to select it again. But in order to get to the menu that contains transform selection, before I hit the Command T on the Mac or the Control T on Windows, I have to right click inside the selection, and then you'll notice that free transform and transform selection are both available. So as we said, free transform will modify the content inside of the selection. transform selection, on the other hand, will allow me to modify the selection itself. So I've picked that option there off of the pop-up menu. Now what I'm going to do with that active is I'm going to zoom in here. And as I zoom in here, I'm going to hop off the screen for a second here so you can see the Navigator display. You'll notice in the Navigator display, if you have this control panel up, we now see this red frame which shows us where we are in the overall document. And that's very handy because we really want to be able to see these control handles and these outside edge lines real cleanly. I'm going to zoom in one more here and then come right up here to this edge. Now what I want to do is I want to grab this control handle on this edge and I want to drag this outward so I get up real close to the outside black border of this puzzle, but not on it or over it. And you have to remember now, anytime you're doing a transform in the newer versions of Photoshop, they're aspect ratio constrained, even though you can't see that on the screen. So you want to make sure when you're doing this, you're holding down the Shift key and making the adjustment at the same time. And you can see I'm getting real close to that black edge there. Now, if I weren't holding down the Shift key, my two corresponding vertical sides to this would be adjusting as well to maintain aspect ratio, which is very frustrating when you zoom back out and realize that you made that mistake and everything resized. So holding down that Shift key is an important way to release that aspect ratio constraint and get here to these outside edges. You'll notice that I'm using my Navigator box here to dial me in real quickly to where I want to be in the document without having to scroll all over the place. I can just absolutely dial right into where I want to be. And as I'm making each of these edge adjustments in my selection, I am holding down the Shift key to make sure that I'm unlocking that aspect ratio constraint. Now on the Mac, I'm going to do a Command 0. That's a Control 0 on Windows to zoom back out. You can see that our transform frame is still active. We're seeing a little bit of the selection underneath it indicating what we're doing. If I now hit Return or Enter, you'll see that I now have a selection that's abutting that black frame nice and tight, which is exactly what we want. Now I want to get rid of that black frame, and if we think about the selection right now, the selection is actually the interior of the document, not the exterior. And we can always check that by taking our cursor and putting it on top of the document, and you can see as I go inside the document, I get that arrow with the dashed rectangle underneath it. And as soon as I go to the outside, you can see I go back to the rectangular marquee tool cursor indicating here I'm inside the selection. Now I'm outside the selection, which is not what I want here. So I got to invert this selection. So we're going to up here, we can do a select inverse from this menu, or we can remember that it's a Shift Command I on the Mac, a Shift Control I on Windows. And now that I've done that, you can see that my selection is now a thin border around the outside of the picture, which is exactly what I want. I want to make sure I get rid of that outside border, including that black line. So with that set up like that, we're going to hit the delete key, and you'll notice that the black frame is gone. If I want to confirm that, if I feel like that selection is in the way, I can do a Command D on the Mac, Control D on Windows, and the selection is now gone. Okay, great. We've gotten rid of our border on our outside edge of our puzzle frame. Exactly what we wanted. This is going to make this work much nicer as we move forward. I need to resize this though. I really want this puzzle to go right out to the edges of the document. So it's the V key to bring up the Move tool. And here's our Move tool icon here. You can see that it's active. Remember, if that tool doesn't come up and you get the artboard tool, just keep hitting V or Shift V depending on how your preferences are set. I'm going to come up here and grab the outside edge of this on the upper right. And you can see that I'm again with that aspect ratio constraint, Shift key, let go of it. Now I can go where I want, and Option key on the Mac, Alt key on Windows to make it size out equally from the center. So I'm going to come up here to this upper right corner, and you can see that we snapped to the lower left corner as well by holding down those two modifier keys. Remember, let go of the mouse first, modifier keys second, so it doesn't snap back to the center or snap back to aspect ratio constraints. Now, Return key or Enter key, commit that change, and it did. And then let's hit the A key to go to the direct selection tool and get rid of that frame. Now I'm going to zoom in again. And as I zoom in, And I'm going to hop off screen here so I can use the Navigator again, and you can follow me. You can see that as I look over here in the corner, the upper edge and the right edge is right up there next to the edge of the document. I'm going to take the Navigator frame and look at this corner, take the Navigator frame, look at this corner. Right away, I see a problem. See that little gap right there? We're not quite to this edge, meaning that it wasn't perfectly centered when we expanded it out with the last move operation. Not a problem. We can fix that. I'm going to come down here about halfway to this edge, and then I'm going to scroll over a little bit. So by virtue of where this red frame is in the Navigator, I know that I'm exactly in the middle from top to bottom. If I grab the Move tool, you can see that my little transform control handle on this left edge is right there in the middle where I expect it to be. And I am going to just scoot this out a little bit to make it fit. Now remember, aspect ratio constraint is always on, so shift key before I make this move. And you can see I just drug it out a little bit, but now there's no gap there in that left edge of the document, meaning that I won't have any unexpected results when I use the magic wand tool to make selections here in the future and I put it in contiguous mode. If I were in contiguous mode and there was a gap here on this left edge like there was before we made this correction, we would expect that all these puzzle pieces along this left side would be selected, making selections more difficult. So hit enter to commit that, A to turn off the move tool, and bring up the direct selection tool and make that frame go away. So there we have it. Let's go ahead and do a Command 0 on the Mac, Control 0 on Windows to zoom back out. Looks pretty good. I think we have this puzzle frame all set now. It's sized up to our document. That border around the edge is gone, which is exactly what we wanted. Before I do anything else, I'm making a copy because I got some other things I want to do to this. And if I screw up, I want to be able to undo and get back to this puzzle frame the way it is because I got a little bit of time invested in this. So that is a Command J on the Mac, Control J on Windows, and you can see I immediately have a puzzle frame copy over here in the Layers control panel. So now I have protected myself against making mistakes in the next steps that I'm getting ready to do. Before moving on, my next step here is going to be turning off the visibility icon here on this puzzle frame layer. This does two things for me. One is it protects me from inadvertently editing that layer, because when a layer is not visible, you can't make changes to it in terms of the content of the layer. And it keeps me from being confused when I'm up here doing operations on this puzzle frame copy layer. Because if I had this layer still turned on and I came up here and say I changed all of the lines up here and got rid of them, it would still look like they were there if this line run, and that tends to confuse a lot of Photoshop users. So remember, sometimes when you make a copy, it's best to just turn the original off so it's not confusing you as you're moving forward. And the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to zoom in here into this corner of the puzzle and a couple times so I get it so I can see these black frame lines nice and cleanly. And then I'm going to grab the magic wand tool with the W key, and again remember to cycle through the tools so you get the Harry Potter wand with that W key, or Shift W depending on how your computer's set up, and just click anywhere on any one of these black lines. Now real quickly we can just review our magic wand settings. I have a tolerance here of 128, but quite frankly it doesn't matter really where my tolerance is unless it's really low. I think 128 is great because it's going to get just about everything on this layer, because really the only thing that's on this layer is these black lines. The rest of it's transparent. Contiguous isn't going to matter here because this is really all one line. Even though it looks like lots of puzzle pieces, it's one connected black line that goes all over the place now. And sample all layers isn't going to matter because really if you think about it, this layer has nothing but those black lines on it, so it makes it a real easy selection here. Okay, now what I'm going to do here with all of these lines selected, I'm going to grab the paint bucket tool with the G key. I'm going to make sure that I have black as my foreground color, and I'm just going to come in here and click anywhere inside my selection and just fill that in. And you notice immediately I've got much thicker, bolder lines, which is exactly what I want. Not guaranteed that all the lines in this EPS file were anti-aliased when it was rasterized, that they're all uniform density of black. Now they are, no question about it. Okay, I am going to undo this selection, Command D key, Control D on Windows. I'm going to grab the magic wand tool again, And what I want to do now is I want to select all of the transparent areas on this layer. So in this particular case, I'm going to turn on sample all layers, just so I'm looking at that white in that background layer, and I'm not looking at a transparent area here as I'm making a selection. And I'm going to go ahead and leave contiguous turned off. I'm going to go ahead and click in here, and you'll notice we now have what looks to be the selection we just had a second ago, but it's not. It is all of the transparent areas around the lines, and you can confirm that two ways. One is you can see the marching ants around the outside of the document. Two is that area is selected. You can tell by that arrow cursor with the dashed rectangle underneath it. If I go over the black lines, you can see Magic Wand tool pops back up indicating it's not selected. That's cool. What we're going to do now is we're going to go and do two things. One is we're going to expand this selection a little bit. And what we're going to do is come up here, go to Select, Modify, and we're going to expand the selection. And I'm going to say, okay, let's modify it by 4 pixels. I'd like it to be a little wider. Well, that didn't work out well. You can see all of the selection lines around the puzzle lines is now gone. Too much of an expansion. Let's do a Command Z on the Mac, Control Z on Windows. You can see our selection went back to the outside. Let's go and repeat that command. Let's do a Select, Modify, Expand, and let's do expand by 2 pixels. Better, but a little bit spotty. See that? There are some places where that selection is now missing over the black lines. Let's do a Command Z on the Mac, Control Z on Windows. Let's do a Select, Modify, Expand one more time, and this time we're just going to expand by 1 pixel. There. Now as I look at that, I can see I still have nice clean spaces over those lines with gaps in the selections. And if I kind of just randomly sample the puzzle, looks pretty good. I don't see any place where a puzzle line has a selection that has come together, so to speak. So a little bit of trial and error to get to where we want to get to there, but I think this will work out well. Now what we're going to do is we're going to grab the paint bucket tool with the G key, right? We're going to make sure that white is our foreground color, so we are going to hit the X key to switch our foreground and background colors, and I'm going to click in here and fill that in with white paint. Now, let's see, did that work? It did. I now have white there in all of those locations. I like that. That's going to work out really, really well. One last step here. Let's go ahead and do a Command D or a Control D to get rid of our active selection. Let's hit the W key to bring that wand tool up one more time. Shift W if you need to. Click on here, reselect the puzzle piece lines themselves. So now our selection is just those black lines. Let's hit the delete key. All of those puzzle piece lines are now gone. And as you can see, I'll zoom in just a little bit more just to make this really obvious. You can see transparency here. Right? So what I'm now seeing is the background layer behind. If the background layer was still on, that'd be a little confusing, so make sure you toggle that just to confirm that. So what you've in essence done here is instead of having all of the black lines with transparency on this layer, you now have all of the white puzzle pieces with transparency on this layer. I'm going to zoom out just a couple of steps here. Let's do a Command D, Control D, to get rid of our selection. Let's do a Command 0 on the Mac, Control 0 on Windows to zoom back out. And you can see if we turn this background back on that it becomes very unclear what we have here. So remember to just check that background here. I'm going to come down here and make the white background active. I'm going to hit the Create New Layer icon down here at the bottom of the Layers control panel, and I'm going to call this Black Background. And you guessed it, we're going to grab the paint bucket tool. We're going to hit the X key to make black our foreground color. And with that black background layer active, let's click in there. Now we've got all our black lines back. Now I know what you're probably thinking at this point. Tim, that was a hell of a lot of work to get to something that looks exactly the way it looked a minute ago. But in reality, there's a subtle difference here. One is the lines between the pieces are thinner because of that step where we expanded the selection. And two is I can make those lines go away. And really 3 is we now have a layer that we can create a clipping mask against in a pretty creative way, which we'll see here in a minute. I'm going to create one more background layer here. So I'm going to just click on the add new layer icon again, and I'm going to double click on this new layer 1 that we just created. I'm going to call this green background. And the only reason I'm doing this is because as we're working, you can see if I turn the green background layer on, it's real clear that there's transparency showing through there. So again, paint bucket tool with the G key, got the wrong paint bucket tool. There we go, G key twice, that's the right paint bucket. I'm going to click on my foreground black color here, and I'm just going to come down here in the RGB color mix here, and I'm going to take green and make it 255. That's about as green as we can get. And with the green background layer active, paint bucket tool on, and green selected, click, there we go. Green puzzle lines in there. Now ultimately we're not going to use any of the puzzle lines in the finished piece here, but this just gives us real clear-cut visibility to the fact that yes, indeed, this puzzle frame copy layer up here is in fact now filled in with white, with the lines that were between the puzzle pieces that were black now gone and transparent. Time for the next step in our tutorial. That's to bring in a picture that we're going to use with this puzzle. So I'm going to do a file open here on my computer. Hopefully you've downloaded both of these. And we have a waving American flag that was in that Google Drive that we made available to you. And with that file open, I'm going to come over here, click on this background layer, and drag it over to my Untitled 1 tab, bring it in here, hold down the Shift key to center it, and let go. Yep, I'm cool with the size of the document being different. Wow, that's kind of fun. It is now buried under some things because that's where we left off last. Let's take this layer 1, do 2 things. 1, double click, and we're going to say flag image, rename it, and let's click and drag the layer strip up here to the top of the stack. There we go. I'm going to zoom out a little bit because what I assume is, looking at this, it's a little big, and I was correct. What I want to do is just make this fit the document exactly. So I am going to come up here and grab just the top edge. Remember that aspect ratio constraint is on, so just bring it down size there. Same thing, I'm holding the Shift key down and I'm just going around all 4 edges, and I'm just snapping that to the size of the document. With snap on, that works really well. Return or enter key. Let's hit the A key to turn off the move tool. Command 0 on the Mac, Control 0 on Windows, and now we're back to being full size. Okay, with our flag image on top and our puzzle frame copy underneath, let's right click on the flag image and create a clipping mask. There you have it. Remember how we couldn't clip when we had the black puzzle frame? But now we can clip. It's because we've taken advantage of the knowledge that clipping works with the areas on the layer that have content and doesn't work on the areas that don't have content, the transparency. And I can see this by turning that off. Yep, there it is in transparent. There's a white background, there's a black background, so on and so forth. So we've used those puzzle pieces now that we filled in with white as the clipping layer, and we now have this see-through ability here. Okay, now I know what you're thinking at this point. We're a good 20 plus minutes into this video, and you've basically showed me how to get back to what we did in the first puzzle tutorial, except the next step is going to be where things get really cool. In order to do this next step, what we want to do is make sure that we make this puzzle frame copy layer the active layer, and then we are going to add a layer effect by clicking on this FX symbol down here at the bottom of the layers control panel. And what we'll do is we'll start off by adding bevel and emboss. And what I would like to do is, I think I'd like to make this a pillow emboss. And then let's play a little bit here, but I think a depth of maybe 50%, 60%, somewhere in there looks pretty good. I think size of 10 pixels is fine. Maybe we'll soften this. 5 pixels, kind of soften up that edge. I can change the angle of the light here. I'm going to go to 130 as my light angle, and it doesn't have to be exact. I'm going to change my highlight mode to normal, and I'm going to change my highlight color here to black, and that's as simple as dragging down this slider in the middle and coming over here. We can see that we now have selected black. I can also confirm that real quickly because I've got 6 zeros here. You can see all of these color systems minus the CMYK one are all zeroed out, so we know that we got black there. And I'll change the shadow mode to normal as well. So there's kind of my settings I want to use here. I'm going to crank opacity up on both of these to right around the 80 ballpark, so right in about there. So I think that works pretty well. So that's kind of what I'm looking for. Pillow emboss. Actually, we'll do it as a smooth, make it a little bit softer transition. So that's what we're looking for. For bevel and emboss, we want pillow emboss is the style. Smooth is the technique. Depth of about 50%. There's our size. There's our number of pixels that we're softening. I'm going to actually change that down one. I might come in here and we can play with the altitude on global light here, and you can watch the puzzle pieces behind. As long as preview is turned on, as I change the altitude, you can see how it changes the shadows around those puzzle pieces. If I'm at an altitude of 0 or 90, that's a pretty direct light. If I come off here at a little bit of an angle, maybe make it 45 degrees, now we're really taking advantage of that off-angle light in the shading here. Again, the rest of these settings, highlight mode, normal black, 80% opacity, shadow mode, normal black, 80-ish% opacity is fine. The other thing that I'm going to add here is I'm going to turn on an inner shadow, and I'm going to make the inner shadow up here, we're going to go with normal as our blend mode there, and I'm going to make the inner shadow white. I'm going to go the opposite in here, drag that saturation slider up there, pick the color up in the upper right hand corner. Now you can see we have what we call the 6Fs up here, which is a web color, or you can see that we have a red, green, blue channel maxed out. If we look up at here at hue, saturation, brilliance, we don't have any hue or saturation, but light is 100%. So a lot of different ways to confirm that that's white, but that's white. So that is our inner shadow mode, and inner shadow mode is not doing a whole lot for us on most of the puzzle. But if you look up here at the blue pieces and turn inner shadow on and off, see how it gives us that little white shadow on the blue pieces, and it makes the contour and the bevel on the blue pieces a little more obvious. And that's our layer effect style there. And now you can see those puzzle pieces are much more dimensional. If I turn effects off, there's without it. If I turn effects on, that's just this visibility icon. Say that 3 times really fast early in the morning. Right here, you can see the difference. It just gives it depth to the picture and makes it much more interesting in looking at it. And here's a really cool thing. That layer effect that we have here is really all about layering effects around those white puzzle pieces. It doesn't really care about the fill lines in here. You notice if I do this with green, not as pronounced. I do that with white, a little bit pronounced, but you can, independently of the layer effect style, still change the border colors in this picture if you need to. So there you have it. We have now kind of taken our original flag concept and turned it completely on its head. We've totally inverted what we've had filled in. It was all the black frames that we were using to lay over the picture. Now we've gone and created all of these white pieces, and we've used those to make our clipping mask. And by the way, we didn't have to fill with white. Remember, doesn't matter what color the clipping mask is, it gets replaced by the picture that's clipped to it anyways. And I think we have a really cool effect here in terms of making this dimensional. Now, this is the basis for what's going to be exercise 4. So at this point, I would encourage you to come out here and do a file save, put this on your local computer, probably makes the most sense. And I'm going to put this out here, and I'm going to call this Puzzle Example 03. So we'll have this when we come in to part 4 in this video series to continue working from here. And you're definitely going to want to do that because part 4 is going to build on this. And I think when you see part 4, and what we can do with it, you're going to be like, wow, that's super cool stuff. There you have it. Our puzzle tutorial part 3. Again, I think you've learned a ton about selections and modifying selections and inverting selections and filling in selection spaces and clipping masks, and now we've thrown layer effect styles in there. So even if you weren't all about making puzzles in Photoshop, this is certainly an arsenal of skills that will be a big plus in your Photoshop toolbox. That's it for this example. Thanks for tuning in. Hey, don't forget to mash that subscribe button down there, because we're bringing more and more of this stuff to you on a regular basis. Hope you found this useful and you can apply this, or at least some of the stuff you've learned, to some of your other Photoshop editing exploits. We'll be here soon with part 4 of this series, plus some new videos. In the meantime, hope you're staying safe and healthy, and appreciate you stop in today. Remember, as we always say, learning equals skills, practice equals mastery. We'll see you out there.